Hello everybody, this is Silver Pride 2021. This is No Place Like Home, a discussion about LGBTQ plus affirmative housing, sponsored by Jigsaw Homes. I'm Craig Burton. With me, I'll let them introduce themselves, or I'll kick off, and if you can ask the next person to introduce themselves. So Tina, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so I'm Tina Wathern. I'm Director of Education and Engagement at Stonewall Housing, and I worked for Stonewall Housing for about, I think, 9 years now. And I originally started working on older people's work, and that's kind of where my interest has been, and how I've got involved with a lot of the projects that have been happening. Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Stephen. I'm the Chief Exec at Stonewall Housing. And I started here just about 1.5 years ago. And so, yeah, really interested to learn what's been happening over the years around older people's housing and also to contribute to it as well. Bob, shall I hand over to you?
Yep, thanks, Stephen. So I'm Bob Green, and I'm working with LGBT Foundation in Manchester to develop the first purpose-built LGBT extra care scheme. Back to you, Craig.
Thank you very much. Great to see you, and thank you for giving up your time today. I know lots of people are really interested. So, so let's get stuck in. Affirmative housing or gay ghetto? Discuss. Stephen, would you like to go first?
Yes, what a question to kick us off. I think it's really interesting to me because, of course, some people are going to think that whenever they hear about LGBTQ plus affirmative housing, they're going to think, why on earth should we have lots of gay people living together, you know, kind of making sure that they get access to housing when others don't? And there's going to be, I would imagine, some criticism of that approach. For me, I think it's really important that we have LGBTQ plus affirmative housing for all age groups, and particularly for the older generations. And it's because, from my point of view, what we see is that LGBTQ plus people are disproportionately affected by poor housing, disproportionately affected by homelessness, and by, you know, a lot of the people that we work with have had very difficult experiences with their landlords or with their families. You know, they haven't always had that really positive and secure experience of accommodation. And so for me, I'm very much in the camp of making sure that LGBTQ plus people have got access to affirming accommodation that allows them to be themselves and to live authentically. And so, yeah, I think that's where I fall down on the side of that argument.
Lovely, thank you. Bob, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think when we did a survey last year in preparation for the design of the LGBT extra care scheme in Manchester, and it was overwhelming, the response. People didn't want to live in ghettos. LGBT people want to live in spaces which are LGBT affirmative, where they feel it's part of their community. They certainly don't want to be exclusive. They don't want to stop people coming in. They want it to be a place which will celebrate their identities as they get older. We want to celebrate our later life, and we want to be in a place where that can be done safely. I had the great pleasure of visiting some LGBT friendly schemes in America a couple of years ago. And it was very clear there that they didn't have LGBT exclusive schemes. They had LGBT friendly schemes that actually also met the housing needs of other populations. So in Los Angeles, for example, there was a strong Russian population living in the scheme. And in Minneapolis, there was a strong Somali population living there. So it's the same for us in the UK. We're now in the very first stages of opening LGBT extra care schemes. And we don't want to make them exclusive. We want to meet the needs of other populations. But when they move in, they know for sure that it's an LGBT scheme.
Tina, do you think we're trying to be everything to everybody here with some of these schemes?
Interesting question. I mean, I think in terms of the kind of talking about ghetto, you know, I'm always reminded about somebody who said to me, you know, one person's ghetto is another person's safe space. So you have to think about, you know, in terms of safety. I don't think it's about trying to be everything to everybody. I think up until, you know, Manchester scheme, tonic housing, we've never had a choice. It's not been a choice that's been available to us. And you know, I often say that if there are other, you know, well, I use the example about if I was a vegetarian, I could probably find some vegetarian care home or residential setting because I know those exist, but I would never have been able to find anything LGBTQ. And as we age, why should we go back in the closet? Why shouldn't we be able to be our authentic selves in retirement as much as we've been, you know, think about people who've been openly out all of their lives, suddenly having to go into a situation where they're not able, they don't feel safe enough to be able to do that. And I don't think it's about being everything for everybody. I think it's about giving us choice, and that being affirmative and being inclusive and including other communities as well, you know, not having, like Bob was saying about the American experience, you know, having other communities that use part of what we do. And we did Building Safe Choices. We've done kind of 1 and 2, which were both bits of research. And they talked about the importance of community space and how other communities coming in to use our community space was really significant. And I think for me, it's just about choice. You know, when you consider the first piece of research was 1995, done by Polari, called As We Grow Older. That's a long time to be having these conversations. And I think I kind of think it's about time, really.
Absolutely agree with you. Do you think do you think we're naive to think that LGBTQIA plus people are all going to live in perfect harmony? The old Coca-Cola song there. Trying to put everybody together from different generations, from all our different. Do you think what gives? Where do we weight it? Who gets the first dibs? Is it about older people, or is it about younger people and affordable housing for younger people? How do we? Who comes first? What's our mission here?
I think it's really interesting to think about that. You know, who is in greatest need here, and how do we meet, and how do we kind of meet all of the needs of all of the people, and is that actually possible, you know, to do that? I like what Tina was saying about choice, you know, the fact that actually up until yet we haven't really had much choice about where we go whenever we get older. And you know, one of the big fears that people have is that after living their life, let's say with their partner for many years, all of a sudden maybe they have to live on their own. And, you know, we hear stories about people putting photographs of their partner away before the plumber comes round because they're worried about the implication of being out and people knowing about who they are. So to have somewhere that you can live and feel safe and know that, you know, no one around you is going to be discriminatory towards you because of your sexual orientation or gender identity. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be other discriminations that people experience, but to have that one removed from us as we kind of enter into our retirement and get ready for our kind of latter years, I think is something that's just really important. In terms of other age groups and what those people need, I think, you know, we've seen at Stonewall Housing that you know, all age groups have some kind of need around their housing, and our job is to really help guide them through that system and to help them think, okay, what is it that you're entitled to, and how can we help you get access to that in a way where they don't have to you know, always kind of think about their sexual orientation first or their gender identity first. They can kind of move past that and really just focus on the housing need. And so, yeah, there's needs in all age groups. But yeah, I'm quite interested in what older people are saying themselves about what they want. And, you know, in that Building Safe Choices report that Tina was talking about, we had more than 80% of people tell us that where they're living doesn't match their needs. And so that, I think, is a real kind of indication that older people are telling us themselves we need something different.
Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think, Craig, the start of your question is very important. We will not all get on. We are a family. Our LGBTQIA plus family is our family of choice. And for a lot of us, we don't have the connection with our blood relatives. And any family doesn't get on from time to time. That's just how it is. And we know that. And when we are designing the scheme, we will have to, we're already creating a community steering group so that we're bringing in as much of the community into the design, not just of the structure, but also of the policies and procedures and the way that things run. Because when we get lots of people together, we need to make sure that we're representing the whole of that family. And we need to recognize that we are hopefully housing all of the LGBTQIA plus families. So that's people from Black and Asian backgrounds, people with religious faith and no religious faith, disabled people. We need to be thinking about the whole aspects of who we are, and we need to be thinking about how we can then, the challenge then goes to our family itself. So the challenge is to the people watching this and to ourselves is what do we need and what do we want from our housing? We need to then go to the housing providers, we need to go to the politicians, we need to go to the charities, and we need to say, where's our housing? Manchester's developing something, Tonic's developing something in London, Leeds, right in place in Leeds. The rest of the country, where are the LGBTI people going to be living? Where is our family going to be living? It's up to us to challenge people to say, this is where we want to live. And isn't it great then that we can now think about, well, are we going to get on or not? Because that's the great pleasure. We don't, as Tina said, we don't have that choice at the moment. So it's great that if we can create a space and we can learn how to live together.
I think that's really interesting. You've led me on to my next, which leads me on to that. And Tina, you could probably talk about this. But isn't it a national issue? Isn't it? We seem to have lots of different people. We seem to have lots of little micro groups that, right, we're going to do this. And I've been, in fact, I've seen Bob a few times on some Zooms with lots of different sort of LGBT affirmative housing organisations, and coming at it from different angles, and very much you naturally, as human beings, I think we look after ourselves first, and we care about ourselves, and we should be number one. And if we don't look after ourselves, we can't look after everybody else, can we? But do you think that why is it not a national? Why is it not a national thing? Why are we not all joining up, and why are we not all sharing this? And why my thing is because we see Manchester doing this. Is my whole thing around Silver Pride, in that we need to get the message out to the whole of the UK. Actually, something's happening, because somebody in a little village in Dewsbury or a little town near Dewsbury in Yorkshire, they'll think it's bonkers, all this stuff. But they think, is it a reality? Can we make it happen? And what has to happen for us to have a cohesive group that actually does something about that? And I'm not talking about making it government policy. I'm saying, what would we do as a group? Have you must, I know you've done lots of work around the older people's agenda, Tina, and this. Do you know of anything that's been done already?
In terms of national work, I mean, I think Stonewall Housing had the National Older LGBT Housing Network, and then that stopped being funded. And with all things that stop being funded, then they just stop existing. And I think so I sat at a meeting when I first started working for Stonewall Housing, and a member of the community said to a table full of people from housing providers, big organisations, and said, why is there no older LGBT housing? And the housing provider said, because nobody has done it. And once somebody does it and the model is successful, other people will do it as well. And I think we do need a national joined up kind of strategy, but actually we need somebody to do it and show that it works, so that everybody else can then understand that it can work and that it does work. And whether that's the Tonic model or the Manchester Extra Care, the Manchester Extra Care model, once it's done, then we've got a model that we can go to provide, other providers nationally and go, look, this works, this really works. And I think that, and I always go back to that statement around, you know, it's because nobody's ever done it. And I think that's true. I think once we've got a model that's effective and works, then we can start thinking about national. Also, we have to not be frightened to have conversations with each other. We have to be, you know, we're a minority community. We need to talk to each other. We need to talk to each other about what's happening, how our schemes are working, and not be, we do lots of collaborative work. So Manchester and Tonic and Stonewall Housing, we do loads and loads of collaboration. And I think that's the really important thing is that we work collaboratively and we celebrate each other, and we share all our knowledge, and we talk about what we're doing. Because I think once somebody does it and it's successful, then there's a good possibility that nationally somebody else will take it on, if that makes any sense. So yeah, that's kind of my view.
Yeah, I know that the stuff that we have seen in and around Leeds, Manchester, it's very, obviously it's very Leeds focused, very Manchester focused, but I think we almost, do you think we almost have a duty to bang the drum a little bit louder and turn the loud heather up a little bit louder, and each project to do things or to at least do PR on a national level, even though you're a regional project, to maybe ignite something?
I think so. I think it's, and once people understand, you know, the Manchester project, you know, Bob and I were involved with that ages ago, years ago, and there's been, you know, it stopped and it started, but actually it's still there and it's still happening, and the foundation are, you know, doing loads of really good work about it. And the same is true of Tonic. You know, I remember some of those first conversations Tonic had a long time ago, and the process takes a long time. But if you can teach other people the process, which I think is what the foundation are doing, correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, that's kind of some of the work that you're doing is like a toolkit type thing for other organizations, and that's, we can teach other people how to do this. But you're right, we need to bang the drum really loudly. We need to be telling everybody what it is that's happening kind of across nationally, I think, in order to get national interest, in order to get other people to do it.
Some of the older people that we've spoken to through Silver Pride, friends of Dorothy, you know, they say, it sounds fantastic. I wouldn't want to live there, but I think sometimes it's having the choice, isn't it? And it comes back to your thing about choice, Tia, that knowing that you can if you want to, and you could if you wanted to, is as good as almost doing it, isn't it? Knowing that you have that safety net there somewhere. And so maybe talking about safety nets, I suppose we know that older people, they learn us an isolation agenda and rebuilding communities that we've all been trying to do. And one of the reasons Silver Pride exists is because of that, to give people some. Do you think, I've heard about the migration of older or recently retired or younger LGBTQIA home workers of migrating to the north because they can't afford to be in the south. What about Blackpool? Where do you think this will go? Where do you think we can, how far can we take this? Should there be several schemes in a city that might cater for different people? Because I spoke to some about, is it about money? Will it be about the ones that can afford it? Will they come first? What happens there? How do we make it affordable for everybody? Who knows more about the numbers? Stephen, do you know about that? You're a chief executive, so you must know that.
I must know about all numbers. I mean, look, it's really interesting to think about where this will end up. And of course, we've seen that migration out of London, for example, where people are realizing that look at the way we're doing this session today. You know, the way that we work these days means that we don't have to be in the same place as we're delivering our services. And so people are thinking, why on earth am I paying all this rent in London or Manchester or, you know, the big cities, when actually I could live a glorious lifestyle in the countryside and still get my work done? So yeah, so there's an interesting kind of process around that. I think affordability is a really important question when we look at this, because we think about, are these schemes available to everyone, or are these schemes available to people who can afford them? You know, and what does that mean, you know, in terms of not just what's happening right now, which I feel really excited about the fact that we've got these new schemes, you know, kind of up and coming, but also what does that look like for the future? You know, like how do we make this sustainable, and how do we make sure that as many people as possible can access these services? And this is where I would come back, Craig, to our initial discussion around that kind of affirming services for LGBTQ plus people. One of the, we ask our service users all the time for feedback, and one of the things they tell us is that they think that if they went to a non-LGBTQ plus service provider, they wouldn't get as good a service as we provide. You know, that's what they think. I'm not 100% sure that that's actually true, but it is what our service users think. And so I think there's a message out there to, if you forgive the term, mainstream providers, to say there's a job here to make sure that LGBTQ plus people look at you and think, oh, that's a service that could meet my needs. And how do we do that? You know, we have to make sure that when we ask questions about people's sexual orientation, we do that so that we can design services that meet their needs, not so that we can discriminate against them. And of course, that's what a lot of our older kind of generations remember. They remember going to the bank and saying, you know, asking the question, are you gay? And if they answered yes, that meant they couldn't get a mortgage, you know? They remember whenever they were filling out forms and asked them if they were HIV positive, and if the answer to that was yes, that was the end of the process, you know? And so there's something about really turning the tide on that and helping our mainstream colleagues demonstrate that they are also able to provide services for LGBTQ plus people. So then we're going to have way more choice. We'll have this exciting project, you know, that where we can go and live with other LGBTQ plus people, or we can go to mainstream providers knowing that our needs are going to be met.
And Tina, around the older people thing, we know that older people have been coming out most weeks for most of their lives and having to come out, even to a new, we've got examples of, I know we've got examples of an osteopath, and we had some friends of Dorothy discount cards, and instead of the osteopath saying, do you have any children? Instead, he said to Eric, he's 90 now, he said, are you going to Pride this year, Eric? Which was just delightful, and that to bring those inclusive, those services, that safe conversation services in-house, and that makes complete sense to me. Do you think that is a reality, Tina? Where do you think we can go with that in terms of how far we can go with normalizing services for our older people?
I think we can. I think it's about commitment, isn't it? So my job at the moment is training, and I'm doing training with a lot of local authorities, particularly. And I think if you're committed to it, you know, I know that, you know, Manchester City Council have been really committed to the extra care scheme. And I think if you're committed to it and you show that you're committed, and you do training and you do all those other things that you need to do, you know, whether it's often about what your organisation looks like from the outside in, isn't it? So what does it look like to LGBTQ people? How do you tell LGBTQ people that you're an affirmative service? And it might be that you change your language slightly. I think that's great, that osteopath saying, you know, are you going to Pride? It's much easier than somebody going, oh, have you got children? And all those kinds of things. And I just think that is really, really important and really significant, I think, and really, yeah, I just think it's really important and really significant. And the fact that but it's about commitment. You have to be committed. You have to be committed from the chief exec to the cleaner. You have to be committed the whole way through. And I know that that's definitely, you know, the reason Manchester is happening is because people on the city council have been committed to it and have been determined to push it through. In the same way with Tonic, there have people that have been committed, you know, the housing provider they're using, the people that Manchester have partnered with. It's about having that commitment to being to providing an affirmative service. I think absolutely so important, and training is one of the ways to do that, but being committed to it and showing that you're committed. Sorry, it's a bit of a passion of mine.
No, that's great. No, that's brilliant. So Bob, we look at so Manchester, I remember the days of James, was it James Anderton, who was that horrible man in Manchester when I was in Manchester, that was, God, with the scourge of the earth. But how far we've come on there, and do you think that councils, local government, towns, small towns might have twigged that it's financially and economically, and housing associations might twig that it's financially and economically a good thing to do? Do you think, have they twigged that yet?
I mean, there is a business case behind it. I mean, that's, this extra care scheme will have to stand on its own 2 feet financially. So there will be a business behind it. But when we did the survey, it was very clear that 20% of people had no savings whatsoever. And 80% of people didn't know how they were going to pay for their future of care and support. So we have a very strange family, our LGBTQ plus family. It's we have people who can afford and who have bought their own properties, and then we have also got people who cannot make ends meet and living in dire poverty. And so our housing needs to meet all of those needs. So there will be a business behind it, but there's also charitable aims behind it, and that's, we need to combine the two. You mentioned earlier about the migration, and LGBT people have been migrating for decades. We've been going to London and Brighton and Manchester, these beacon cities, and moving there, and Hebden Bridge, and setting up lesbian, housing, and we've had lesbian squats in London and gay men squats. So, these things have happened naturally. What we're calling for, and what I think, what hopefully a lot of the LGBT plus communities are calling for, is a more strategic approach. And that means working with councils and housing providers, because they have a duty. They have a duty not just to house, the heterosexuals of the world, but they have a duty to house lesbians, gay men, bisexual and trans people, non-binary people. And it's up to us to come together and start thinking about, well, what are our answers? So it's in those small towns and small villages. We've got community housing now. Community housing are taking over community centres and old churches and converting them into housing. There's the LGBT Community Land Trust starting up. So let's band together and let's think about new ideas and new approaches and see what housing we can dream up ourselves. And it's up to the local authorities and providers to work with us, rather than give us something that we may not want. Work with us and help us build what we want.
Yeah, do you think on the back of that, maybe, I don't know who to ask about this, but all the schemes that I've seen so far are new build, and that they're quite modern. And is there any, looking at the fallout of COVID and the high street, and we hear it most days, or I do, that there's another, I think Debenhams in Leeds is being turned into student accommodation. Do you think Debenhams could be the Gay Gables of Manchester? Could we? What happens there? Do you think we could? Do you think that's worth pushing? Do you think, has anybody done anything about that? Do you think to take over some of the inner city things?
I think we should. I think there are lots of community groups out there as well that need space. I'm not saying convert Debenhams into accommodation unless it's good quality accommodation. I don't want us living in tiny boxes, but community spaces. When we did our survey, there was 80% wanted more community or supported housing, but they also wanted events and community spaces. Our community's crying out for a bit of community after COVID. A lot of us are living in dire loneliness, and if we can work together and take over Debenhams and have community spaces and housing, we need partners to work with us, and that's if private people with money, any famous celebrities on Silver Pride this year want to support us, then we've got lots of ideas.
There's certainly money around, isn't there? And I suppose if we look at, a big thing is about legacy, and especially older LGBT people. I suppose my generation, lots of us decided that we were probably going to be dead before we were 50 because of AIDS and HIV. So we didn't have things like life insurance. It was a bit pointless, and it still is if you're on your own, I suppose. But I suppose that where do we go? And we've come back to the money thing or the affordable. And somebody said to me not long ago, isn't this just privatising the gay gentrification of places? Is that a possibility? That it's seen as a great thing? I'm trying to think some of the examples. There's all sorts of, Shoreditch, I suppose, that sort of the creatives and the all those kind of people moved in there because it was a dump, wasn't it? And they kind of moved it and they kind of gentrify it and that sort of gauge it, and then it's privatised. Is that good, or is that a red flag for us? What should we watch out for?
Oh, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think all of the conversations around gentrification are so complex, about taking over areas and things. And I think, what you're saying about student accommodation and Debenhams taking over, and I'm not sure that's the right response, really. I think all of those things, the gentrification, there's arguments for it and arguments against it, aren't they? But it's about where the LGBTQ community fit in. And I think what Bob was saying was really important about it's the quality of the accommodation, isn't it? It's not about, just converting an office block into accommodation because we need accommodation. It's about the quality, and it's about the community space. I know, like Bob was saying, that every single piece of research we've ever done. So the stuff that went on in Manchester, building safe choices, even the Polari research in 1995 talks about community space. There needs to be this bit of community space where people can get together and maybe invite other communities into that space. But it's really important, I think, that it's the quality of the accommodation. It's also about the infrastructure in terms of, making sure the staff I go back to training, but making sure the staff have been trained and all those kinds of things. And I think that's really, that bit is really important, that we make sure it's good quality housing rather than just, we need some housing here, have some housing. So I think it is really important.
Absolutely. It's kind of, I suppose the LGBT community have had to sort of make do with what's available for far too long, and the idea that actually we get choice and actually we're saying, no, that does that befit my standards? And we've got tons of examples of older people that live in tiny little apartments on first floors, but you go in there and it's a palace, and it's theirs, and that's their safe haven. Why do we need what needs building then? Why do we need it in 2021?
I think it comes back to the thing around choice. There is no choice. Why should we set up for mainstream services that don't know about our lives and don't know about people who were criminalized and don't know about the kind of coming out process that we do every single day because it isn't written in neon above our head? And it's because it's about people understanding our lives in a heteronormative cisgendered world where it's really important that people understand about us, particularly when we're talking about older people and you're talking about care settings. And there's a number of narratives I can tell you about people in care settings who've just been, who particularly have had really hard times where it hasn't been suitable and staff haven't worked in a kind of proactive way. And I think, why do we need it in 2020 when we need it? Because it isn't there. And Manchester and Tonic are the first, and they should be celebrated, and the stuff that's going on in Leeds should all be really celebrated because it's new and it's what we need. Why do we need it in 2021? Because we do.
Good. That's good enough for me. Have anybody else got anything to add to that?
Just the fact that, if you look at Manchester and Liverpool over the last few weeks, the number of homophobic attacks, and it's homophobic, biphobic and transphobic attacks. There's, the murals being defaced, graffiti, and it's 2021 and LGBT people still don't feel safe. And this safety was a big issue. When we did the press release for the scheme, we've done a few over the years, but the most recent one in March of this year, even then, there was a lot of people worried about having the scheme's address public. And people are still concerned about the safety elements. And this is something that we're needing to work with local community groups and community safety teams. How do we make this place a place of celebration, but also make it a safe space? And it goes back, I think, to what you were asking earlier, Craig, about, you know, what do we want? We've been living underground. I think in Big Issue, your Maisie Toilette interview was fantastic. And Maisie was talking about, you know, the history of being underground. Our LGBT history has always been underground or behind boarded up windows. Now we want to open those windows, and we want to have a scheme that's, you know, advertised and that people can see it from the street. And people are nervous about that. What's it going to look like? And are there going to be rainbow balloons out 20 or 365 days of the year? Some of our family want to say, yes, of course it is, and we want to fly the flag every day. Others are very nervous. And so we're balancing both at the moment, celebration and safety.
It's funny, isn't it? Still that we still have that that don't flaunt it, especially in the older community. You don't but don't flaunt it. Don't keep yourself under the radar. And it's wet. And then just as people feel as though it's safe to go back in the water, suddenly these big ugly things raise their heads. And I suppose that's and that's very much what my gender and Silver Pride's agenda is: older LGBTQIA people, and the safety of them feeling a part of community and that feeling of belonging. So I love the extra care, Bob. So is it extra care is being delivered by LGBT people?
Well, this is what we're discussing at the moment about who delivers it. We have, in the survey we asked, and the overwhelming response was that organizations are either LGBT or they've been accredited as LGBT affirmative. So that's housing staff and care staff. And the LGBT extra care scheme in Manchester will be, if you like, the flagship scheme. And what Tina and Stephen have been talking about earlier, the rest of the schemes across Manchester will have the accreditation. So LGBT people will have the choice, and if they want to go to another scheme. So who delivers the housing and the care, that's all up for, we have this community steering group, as I said, and that's got older LGBT people on it, as well as older locals and representatives from all the stakeholders, so that we're all talking about the operational aspects as well as the design, as well as who delivers care, who delivers housing.
Yeah, I think the tonic model is slightly the same. That tonic have a community panel for exactly those reasons, around some of those discussions around, you know, who's going to provide this particular piece of work. And I think that's really important, isn't it? That in order to feel safe, older people, older LGBTQIA people need to believe that the people who are providing that, all of those services, have got some either accreditation or, you know, they've been trained, and you can see that that's what those people have got. And then it's because it is, like Bob says, it's very much around helping people to feel safe, you know, and the safety that.
And what I'm thinking is, what you and Bob are talking, Tina, is, you know, just taking away that risk. You know, like if you go to the doctor, let's say, or if your nurse comes out to visit you in your house, one of the things you're weighing up all the time is, if they find out I'm gay, are they going to treat me differently? If they find out I'm gay or bisexual or trans or lesbian, are they going to discriminate against me? You know? And so to be able to just take that away from people and say, look, it doesn't really matter whether this person is LGBTQ plus themselves, but what we can guarantee you is that you don't have to worry about being yourself. That is a given, and there's no risk here for you. And that's something that I just wish we could get into the fabric of society, you know, because of course, you know, the schemes themselves will be a safe place, but the minute they walk out the door, you know, people like, so I'll talk about myself. I've been with my partner for 13 years. We don't hold hands when we go outside, you know, and it's not because we don't want to. We do. We're one of those couples that want to kiss and hug and everything, you know. But we don't do it because we know it's not safe. you know? And so how do we make sure that this safety that we can create within these schemes and within these, you know, really lovely, warm, loving environments, how can we then get that into the community as well? And so, yeah, that's the message I think we have to give to people who are coming to these schemes. It's absolutely okay to be yourself. There's no risk associated with it here.
Yeah, can I ask really therefore, so that we all talk about, and we know that lots of people attract really good funding. We say it's intergenerational, and we're working with older people and younger people. We know that that's a given. What help could we expect or encourage and foster from our younger community to have that relationship? I know that we did this with FOD, and we do it with Silver Pride, in that we encourage younger people to talk to older people, because it's that grandparent-grandchild beautiful relationship that they can talk about things that you could never talk to your grandmother about, because she just wouldn't get it. Where do we meet there? How can we encourage and foster some that, as though our younger community might actually, just like we were told to respect our elders and look after granny, how can we flip that so our younger generation would maybe feel as though they can take care of some of the giants whose shoulders that we all stand in the future? It's one of our last questions. This, what can we do? What happens in these schemes? Does anything twig anybody that we could do to encourage that?
I think the use of community space is really important, isn't it? Because if you've got community space in a scheme, then you might attract the younger generation into that scheme for whatever reason. And I know, there are really good intergenerational schemes that work quite well. I think in America there's some, and we've definitely heard of intergenerational schemes. I think Berlin, there's a scheme in Berlin which is intergenerational, and they work really well. But it's about the community space, and if you've got younger community members, I don't know, coming in for a yoga class or art classes or whatever, then there's an opportunity to have those conversations in a quite informal way, which is where a lot of really good learning goes on. And so I think fostering those relationships can happen in those community spaces, definitely. I mean, that's what I think.
It's great, isn't it? Encouraging that social currency that you have a chat with an older person. I heard of somebody they had Japanese lessons for some older people. Can you imagine how much fun that must have been? They just giggled the whole way through. I know we did some Spanish lessons, but I think all that sort of stuff just have a little bit of fun. Anybody got any really big points you want to make just before we wrap up?
I was just going to say, Craig, I did some work previously with care leavers and some intergenerational work around that. And one of the biggest learning points for me was that we have to see it as reciprocal. It can't be the young people looking after the old people. It has to be this relationship with each of the people learning something from the other or gaining something from the other. And so, like we could dream up, couldn't we, schemes where we had younger people living with older people, and a mentoring scheme where people, kind of did some co-mentorship or whatever. But for me, it's about making sure that this isn't a charitable act towards the older person. This is actually something that everybody gains from, and there's value to be created, not just for those involved, but for the wider community as well.
That's interesting, isn't it? Now, I think it's sometimes maybe, I don't know whether you agree, but to welcome older, I know that older people, we talk about our pronouns now, don't we? And very much. And when I mention that to somebody else, say, oh, I'm too busy for all that, love. You think, well, and I get that, and I forgive that, and that's fine. And that's some of the things that we can maybe work towards, isn't it? So, do you know what? That's all we've got time for. Thank you for joining us. Thank you dearly for joining us. Remember, you can donate to Silver Pride by going to silverprideuk.com. Your donation will go to grassroots LGBT plus groups dedicated to supporting older people and to encourage and foster intergenerational communication. Thank you very much.